The gavel slammed before he even reached the podium. "Mr. Lawson," the judge barked, his voice echoing to the courtroom like command carved in stone. "I don't have all day. If you intend to represent yourself, at least try to sound prepared." A faint murmur of laughter stirred from the gallery. Tight, smug, unkind. The kind of laughter that grows only when people believe the man standing in front of them doesn't belong there. Malik Lawson lifted his eyes slowly, calmly. His suit was plain. His tie was slightly creased from the bus ride. And yet his posture held something unspoken. Something steady, something unshakable. But no one in the room cared enough to notice. They only saw what they wanted to see. A black man standing alone in a courtroom built on polished marble, surrounded by people certain of their superiority. He hadn't opened his mouth yet, and already they underestimated him. The prosecutor leaned back smugly, his expensive watch catching the light. "Your Honor, we can proceed quickly. This should be simple." Simple. That word stabbed deeper than anything else. Not because Malik feared losing, but because he could feel the weight of it. The weight of every quiet assumption pressing against him. He saw it in the way the bailiff avoided eye contact, in the smirk the court reporter tried to hide, in the subtle whisper from the back row, "He's going to lose." Look at him. Malik inhaled, slow and controlled. He had been in far colder rooms, far tougher battles. But today was different. Today, he wasn't fighting for pride. Today, he was fighting for the truth. The judge leaned forward, squinting down at him. "Mr. Lawson, are you sure you want to continue without legal counsel? This isn't traffic court. This is a civil suit with serious implications." And frankly, the judge paused, lips curling. "I hope you know what you're doing." The courtroom chuckled again. Malik didn't look at the judge. Not yet. He focused instead on something else. Something only he knew. A truth he had carried quietly for 12 years. A truth that, once revealed, would shake the entire room. "I'm ready," Malik said, his voice calm, deep and steady. The judge snorted, not laughed, not chuckled, but snorted like the idea disgusted him. "Proceed, then. Impress us." That word, impress, hung in the air like a challenge wrapped in mockery. Malik finally raised his head fully, and when his eyes met the judge's, the mockery flickered. Just for a second, almost like the judge sensed something he couldn't yet name. Malik stepped forward, placing a single folder on the podium. Thin, too thin for any real defense, or so they thought. Whispers rose again. The prosecutor smirked. "Is that all you brought?" More laughter. Malik opened the folder without reacting. The courtroom lights buzzed faintly overhead, the air still with anticipation. Anticipation of his failure. But Malik wasn't rushing. He didn't crumble. He didn't shrink. He simply turned one page slowly, deliberately, as though he had all the time in the world. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "before we begin, I need to state something for the record." The judge rolled his eyes. "Go on." And then Malik said the sentence that made the courtroom fall into a heavy, confused silence. "Everything presented against me today was built on a lie told by a man who never expected I would recognize his signature, or that I would know exactly where he forged it." The prosecutor's smile dropped. The judge straightened. The gallery leaned forward. "Mr. Lawson," the judge said slowly, "what exactly are you implying?" Malik looked up, a subtle calm settling over him. "I'm implying," he said, closing the thin folder with a faint snap, "that before this hearing ends, one of the men sitting in this room will lose far more than he expected. And it won't be me." Gasps. Silence. The prosecutor stiffened, gripping the edge of his table. Malik took a single step back from the podium, the tension twisting like a tight wire ready to snap. Because he knew what was coming. He knew what evidence he held. He knew the truth he was about to unleash. And just as the judge opened his mouth to demand an explanation, the courtroom doors swung open behind everyone, loud, forceful, urgent. Every head turned. And Malik's expression changed. But not with fear, with recognition, with triumph, with the assurance of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. The judge frowned. "Who is that?" Bailiff stopped him. But it was too late. The figure stepped into the room, holding a sealed envelope with a federal stamp. An entire courtroom froze. The stranger stepped forward, the sealed federal envelope gripped firmly in their hand. The courtroom seemed to shrink as every eye locked onto them. The bailiff hesitated, unsure whether to stop them or clear the way. The judge, irritated but suddenly cautious, lifted a hand. "Identify yourself," he demanded. The stranger nodded politely. "My name is Special Investigator Dana Wells, Division of Federal Financial Crimes." Her badge gleamed as she displayed it. Her tone was steady, official, but beneath it was something else: urgency, purpose. "I have documents relevant to this case. Documents Mr. Malik Lawson requested under federal right of access." Malik lowered his eyes for a brief moment, a quiet confirmation. He had known she would come. He hadn't known when, but he knew this was the moment everything began to shift. The judge adjusted himself in his chair, the arrogance he wielded so easily now faltering. "Approach the bench," he ordered, though his voice lacked its usual dominance. She handed the envelope to him. The seal tore loudly in the near-silent room. Paper slid out, rustling like the whisper of a coming truth. The judge skimmed the first page, and his face changed. His brows pulled together. His lips tightened. Whatever he thought he'd see, this wasn't it. The prosecutor shuffled nervously. "Your Honor? What is that?" The judge didn't answer. He turned another page. His eyes darted from the document to Malik, then back down. The confidence drained out of him. Then, slowly, he placed the papers aside. "Mr. Lawson," he said, voice subdued now, "would you explain how you obtained these records?" Malik stepped forward, not arrogantly, not triumphantly, but with the firm calm of a man who had long carried a truth no one chose to believe. 12 years ago, Malik began, "I worked for the company that's suing me today. I wasn't part of the executive team. I wasn't anyone special in their eyes. I worked quietly in the background, but I handled financial logs, transfers, authorizations." His voice deepened. "And I recognize that signature because I watched the man who forged it practice his handwriting while giving me orders." A few people in the gallery gasped. The prosecutor's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. Malik continued, his tone steady and clear. "I stayed silent back then because I needed that job. I needed the money. I didn't have the power to confront anyone." He paused, the weight of that memory sitting heavily on him. "But the lie they built back then, the lie they're now trying to use against me, never left my mind. And when they filed this case, claiming I falsified records I knew they altered, I requested an official audit." The judge looked down at the federal documents again. Special Investigator Wells spoke softly to reinforce the truth. "Your Honor, the audit confirms Mr. Lawson's claim. The financial records were manipulated internally, not by him, and the identifications in these documents prove who actually forged the signatures." All eyes turned slowly toward the prosecutor's table. He froze, his jaw clenched, his hands tightened into fists on the table's surface. Malik didn't look at him with anger. He didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He simply breathed. For the first time in 12 years, a weight he carried quietly, secretly, was beginning to lift. The judge leaned back, his arrogance replaced with something uneasy, embarrassment, maybe even guilt. "Mr. Lawson," he said slowly, exhaling, "it appears the court owes you more than an apology." The courtroom murmured again, but this time it wasn't mockery. It was shock, shame, realization. Malik lowered his head briefly, not in defeat, but in relief. He had walked into a room full of people convinced he didn't belong. Now those same people were seeing him clearly for the first time. But the moment wasn't over. Special Investigator Wells stepped forward again, clearing her throat. "Your Honor, with your permission, I need to proceed with a statement regarding the individual responsible for the forged documents." The prosecutor shifted sharply, eyes wide. Malik turned his head, his face unreadable, his voice calm. He already knew what she was about to say, and he had been waiting years for this. The courtroom had gone still, so still that even the hum of the overhead lights sounded loud. Special Investigator Dana Wells held her folder against her chest, eyes fixed on the judge, waiting for permission. The prosecutor sat rigid, sweat gathering at the edge of his hairline, his entire confidence draining away in front of everyone. "Proceed," the judge said quietly. Dana stepped away from the bench and positioned herself so the entire room could hear her. Her voice was firm, but not cruel, just a voice carrying the truth into a place that had relied on assumptions far too long. "The forged signatures," she said, lifting the document, "were traced to an individual within the plaintiff's organization, a senior individual who had direct access to the accounts Mr. Lawson was accused of tampering with." The prosecutor's breathing picked up. His fingers twitched. He looked everywhere except at Malik. Dana continued. "The audit also confirms that Mr. Malik Lawson reported inconsistencies years ago, though his report was never entered into the internal system. It was deleted." A ripple of gasps washed across the room. The judge's face tightened, not in anger at Malik, but in something closer to shame. All his earlier dismissiveness, every sarcastic remark, every laugh he allowed to live in his courtroom, it now weighed heavily on him. Malik stood quietly, his heart steady. He wasn't enjoying this moment. It wasn't triumph for him. It was vindication, painful, overdue, heavy. Dana turned her eyes toward the prosecutor. "The person responsible for forging the records," she said slowly, "is the same individual who filed this case and submitted falsified evidence to this court." The prosecutor's chair screeched as he stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous, Your Honor. I've served this court with integrity for 15 years. Dana didn't flinch. Neither did Malik. "Integrity," she said, "isn't measured by years. It's measured by truth." The judge held up a hand. "Sit down." But the prosecutor kept talking, anger boiling. "He's lying. He manipulated those records himself. He's just trying to save himself." Malik finally turned his head toward him, not with rage, but with the quiet strength of a man who survived this long, without losing himself. "I didn't need to save myself," Malik said softly. "I just needed the truth to speak." And somehow that sentence cut deeper than any accusation. The prosecutor's lips trembled. His eyes darted around, searching for anyone to believe him. But all he found were faces realizing what he had done. Dana lifted the final document. "Your Honor, this file contains timestamps, IP logs, and a digital trail showing exactly who accessed and altered the financial documents. The evidence is conclusive." The judge reached for the file, jaw tight, eyes narrowed, not in disbelief, but in confirmation. Everything Malik had claimed, everything they laughed at, everything they dismissed, was true. The judge placed the paper down with a heavy breath. "Mr. Lawson," he said, voice low, respectful now, "you are hereby cleared of all accusations." The gallery murmured again, this time in astonishment, some in guilt. Malik closed his eyes briefly, exhaling for the first time in what felt like years. But the moment didn't end there. The judge turned his eyes slowly toward the prosecutor. "Mr. Hale," he said, his tone now cold and commanding, "you are to remain in the courtroom. There will be immediate review of your conduct, and potential charges will follow." The prosecutor's face drained of color. Something shifted in the room then, not just legally, but morally. The power imbalance that had been suffocating Malik from the start was finally cracking, crumbling. Malik stood tall, not bigger, just clearer, finally seen for the man he truly was. And then, slowly, he picked up the thin folder he brought, the one they mocked for being too light, too empty, too insignificant. He held it gently in his hand, and as he looked up at the judge in a room that once laughed at him, he said just one sentence, calm, simple, and devastatingly true. "I warned you the truth was thin, but powerful." The words hung in the air, silencing everything. And the judge, who laughed at him at the beginning, now sat speechless, humbled, almost small. The courtroom doors remained closed. The prosecutor's fate hung in the balance. The truth Malik carried had finally broken free. The judge leaned back in his chair, the weight of everything revealed pressing down on him. His earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by an uneasy stillness. The courtroom, once buzzing with quiet laughter and smug whispers, now sat in stunned silence. Every face turned toward Malik with mixture of guilt, admiration, and disbelief. Malik didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply stood still, grounded in the truth that had finally seen daylight. The thin folder in his hand rested against his leg, no longer a symbol of weakness or mockery, but of patience, endurance, and quiet courage. Special Investigator Dana Wells gathered her documents and stepped back, her job done. She gave Malik a small nod, not of pity, but of respect. He returned it with a grateful nod of his own. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Lawson, on behalf of this court, He stopped, eyes lowering, choosing his words carefully. "I regret the manner in which this hearing began. I should have..." Another pause. "Listen more carefully." A judge apologizing. Something no one expected to hear. Malik didn't make him struggle. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said simply. His voice held no bitterness, just clarity. The prosecutor, Mr. Hale, stood frozen at his table, his face pale and stiff. He looked smaller now, shrunken under the truth he once tried to bury. The bailiff positioned himself discreetly at Hale's side, not touching him but making the next steps unmistakably clear. The judge turned toward Hale slowly. "Given the evidence, you will remain here for immediate inquiry and detainment. This court will not tolerate manipulation of justice." Hale didn't respond. He simply lowered himself into his chair, breathing hard, staring at nothing. Malik looked at him, not with revenge, but with a painful understanding. He had spent years suffering because of the man who saw him as expendable. And even now, standing in victory, Malik refused to let hate take root. Instead, he turned toward the courtroom gallery. The very people who had chuckled, whispered, doubted, their eyes lowered, ashamed. Malik inhaled, then spoke softly, but with strength that filled every corner of the room. "This was never about proving I was smarter," he said. "It was about proving I was telling the truth. A truth you didn't think someone who looked like me could possibly hold." A few people looked up, some with tears forming, others unable to meet his gaze. Malik continued, "All I wanted was a fair chance. Not special treatment, not sympathy. Just a chance to be heard without you deciding who I was before I spoke." He turned back to the judge. "That's all any of us want." The judge nodded, guilt lining his face. The moment stretched, quiet and heavy, not with anger, but with acknowledgement, with reckoning. Malik stepped away from the podium. His hands trembled slightly now that the tension was releasing, years of swallowed frustration finally loosening their grip. Dana Wells approached him on her way out. "You handled this with dignity," she murmured. Malik exhaled. "I handled it the only way I could." She offered him a respectful half-smile. "The truth was on your side, and today it mattered." He watched her leave, the courtroom doors closing behind her. Then Malik turned once more to look at the space he had walked into as a man people expected to fail, and was now leaving as a man they finally saw. The judge stood. "This hearing is adjourned." The gavel fell, this time not as a weapon, but as a confirmation. Malik gathered his folder, the same one that once symbolized ridicule, and pressed it to his chest. He walked past the gallery, and people parted instinctively, making room for him, not out of fear, but out of respect. Some whispered apologies. Some simply lowered their eyes. A few nodded at him, a silent acknowledgement of the injustice he had survived. As he stepped into the hallway, the heavy wooden doors closed behind him, leaving the courtroom, and everything it tried to take from him, on the other side. Malik paused, breathing in the clean corridor air. For the first time in years, he felt lighter. But outside those doors, a world waited. Some ready to support him, some ready to doubt him again. And Malik knew his next decision. What he would say, what he would do with his victory, would define not just the case, but the message his story would carry. And that final choice, the one that would echo far beyond the courthouse walls, was what he now had to make. Malik stepped out of the courthouse and into the sunlight, blinking as the warmth hit his face. For a moment, he simply stood there, letting the air fill his lungs, letting the world feel real again. Behind him, justice was being served, slowly, awkwardly, imperfectly, but served nonetheless. The door closed with a heavy wooden thud, sealing away the echoes of doubt, disrespect, and the quiet cruelty he endured. A few reporters lingered on the steps, microphones ready, cameras blinking red. They hadn't taken interest before. Stories of black men wrongfully accused didn't earn attention until the plot flipped in ways people couldn't ignore. But Malik didn't resent them. He'd come to understand something about the world. Some people only look when the truth becomes too loud. One young journalist approached carefully. "Mr. Lawson, would you like to make a statement?" Malik looked out at the city moving around him. Cars rushing by. Strangers walking. The ordinary rhythm of life continuing without pause. And he realized this moment wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about what came next, about using what happened to spark something bigger. He turned toward the cameras and the small crowd that had gathered. "At the start of this case," he said, voice steady but warm, "people laughed at me. They judged me before I spoke. They decided what I was worth because of how I looked, where I came from, what they assumed I didn't know." He paused, letting the words settle. "But I didn't come here to prove them wrong. I came here because truth deserves a voice, even when the world tries to silence it." A murmur of agreement rippled through the small crowd. Malik continued, his tone rising with quiet conviction. "Every day, someone who looks like me walks into a room where they're underestimated, misjudged, dismissed, not because of their talent or their character, but because someone else decided they weren't enough before they even tried." His eyes softened, remembering the laughs, the whispers, the disrespect. But today shows something important. The truth is powerful. Dignity is powerful. And when we stand firm, even when the world doubts us, justice can still break through. The journalist lowered her microphone slightly, visibly moved. Malik took a breath and spoke the words he needed the world to hear. "I didn't win today because I was loud. I won because I was patient. I was prepared. And I refuse to let anyone else define who I was." He lifted the thin folder just slightly, a symbol of what quiet strength looks like. "This," he said softly, "is what believing in yourself looks like, even when no one else does." Then he turned toward the courthouse behind him, the place that once swallowed his voice and now echoed with the truth it couldn't ignore. "I hope today reminds someone watching this that your worth isn't determined by the people who misunderstand you, and your dignity isn't something anyone has a right to take." A small crowd had gathered now, listening intently. Some nodded. A few wiped their eyes. Malik stepped away from the cameras, leaving the reporters behind. He didn't need more attention. He only needed to know that the message landed, that someone, somewhere, would walk into their own courtroom one day, literal or metaphorical, and remember they were not powerless. As he reached the bottom of the courthouse steps, his phone buzzed. A message from his younger brother. "Proud of you, bro. They see you now." Malik smiled, not because they finally saw him, but because he never stopped seeing himself. He walked forward, shoulders relaxed, each step lighter than the last. He didn't need the judge's approval. He didn't need apologies. He didn't need recognition. He had justice. He had truth. He had himself. And as the city swallowed him into its rhythm, one quiet thought carried him onward. "If they ever doubt me again, I'll still be standing." And so Malik's story became more than a courtroom victory. It became a reminder that justice is possible, dignity is non-negotiable, and resilience is a form of power the world cannot take away. His voice, once dismissed, became a light for others walking through their own storms. If his journey touched you, if his strength inspired you, if his truth felt familiar, then don't let it end here. Share this story. Comment your thoughts and subscribe to Black's Voice. So these stories, these truths, these voices are never silenced.